we're back. Question number 3. How long did you work at the farm?
Um, right up until my sophomore year in high school. So, and I had worked at a couple of other farms based on this reputation that I had developed with these two farmers. I worked at a rich man's farm, Chedco Farms. He owned the Cherry Burrell Company, which was part of Borden's, and he had a multi-million dollar farm. All his cows were perfectly groomed. We spent time brushing their tails and grooming the cows. And the other thing that I learned there was that money was no object. We didn't have to worry about the cost of items. You always had the best equipment, always had the best of everything. But the thing I remember most about that next job was that he fed his cows sugar beets. Now he had Guernseys. The other two farms were Holstein cows, and they were large volume cows. The Guernsey cow is a high butterfat content in their milk, and he enhanced that by feeding sugar beets. Now, you just don't go willy-nilly passing out the sugar beets to all the cows because everybody would love it. Each cow had an exact measurement of food, and so based on their production and based on the butterfat content from each cow, because every cow was evaluated, we had to keep very specific records in terms of not only the weight and the production of the cow, but also the butterfat content that was being produced. And consequently, the food that was rationed had to be measured, and it was in direct ratio to how much performance we would get from the cows. And what I learned there was the business of agriculture. And again, this was a multi-million dollar farm, where you would not think that kind of thing would happen. It would, you would just give the cows the best. But everything was metered, everything was measured. And it taught me a business sense that served me well later in life because, I'll tell you a great story. My mother was a terrible cook. And every Saturday we would have hot dogs and beans. And my mother would cook the beans and then lay the hot dogs on top of the beans. And she'd continue to cook them until all the hot dogs were split. And they were awful. So I had come home with a submarine sandwich, the first time we'd ever had one in the family. And my mother loved it, my father loved it. And so Saturday nights, no more hot dogs and beans. We now started eating submarine sandwiches. And my father was giving me a ride home, and we were driving by the submarine sandwich shop, and I saw a sign that said, "Out of business." And I said, "Dad, Angelina's is out of business." And my father, without blinking, said he didn't weigh the bologna. And yes, he made great sandwiches, but he didn't know how much bologna he was putting in the sandwich, and so he put himself out of business. And that goes back to the Chedco Farms in terms of measuring the food. I can't tell you, out of the graves are words of eloquence. I think of that all the time. You didn't weigh the bologna. And how many people fail in business because they don't watch the details? They don't look at, you might make a great sandwich, but if you're giving away the profit, or if you're giving away, the best sandwich in the world, but you're losing money every time you sell one, then it's pretty important that you understand some business rules. And something that Angelina didn't understand was weighing the bologna. So I hope that answers your question.
Question 4. How were your relationships with coworkers?
Well, I really didn't have, the coworkers I had were adults. So I was always I was always spreading the manure and doing the things nobody really liked to do. So I didn't have the working relationships. I think the relationships that I learned later in life, because I understood hard work, I understood some of the business of hard work, but I really learned about relationships when I was in the Marine Corps. And the Marine Corps taught me a dependence on my buddy. And so it all came down to making sure that not only am I okay, but is my buddy okay? And the guy in the next foxhole had to say the same thing about me. And and so there's a trust that develops between coworkers that makes for a unit that will survive. It's not a condition that you can that's imposed by a job. It's imposed by people's spirits. You understand that you're all in a function, but the way that the function will work best is if you have working relationships with people who are in the same situation. So in the Marine Corps, from one foxhole to another, you better have a good relationship with that person, because consequences are not good if you don't. And in real life, when you get to think about life, yeah, you have two perspectives you can take in life. One is a perspective from the boss down, and always think about the boss down. But I really think that the way to success is from the little guy in. What's the little guy thinking about? And how do you keep the little guy happy? Because if the little guy is in sync and he is working in your best interest, then you really don't have a lot to worry about. But if all you're doing is dictating down and not understanding what the work that's involved or the effort that's being expended to help you succeed, it's really coming from the little guy in. It's not coming from the top down. And so that's kind of a relationship that you develop because of coworkers. If you have proper management and proper supervision, then that teamwork can come together quite easily. If it's not, then you're really doomed, because if it's not for the little people, it's not for the worker bees, it's not for them, you're not going to succeed. And so what does it take? Well, it takes honesty and commitment and understanding how hard somebody else is working for you. And hope that answers your question.